When you see the little notice come up on your screen, you're ready to go.
Okay. There's a notice we're recording. Hello, everyone. This is the PAC PNP meeting for July, and this meeting may involve the remote participation by members either by telephone or other electronic means due to the local public emergency novel coronavirus pandemic, pursuant to the provisions of Minnesota statutes, sections 13D.021. Thank you for that. Hello, one and all. This is our July Programs and Policy Subcommittee meeting for PAC, and we have an agenda, and we have looks like we have our presenters ready for signalization are here. So I'll introduce them. We have we're welcoming Alan Klugman, Ryan Anderson, and Ben Bresser from City of Minneapolis Public Works. And they're from, the topic today is signalization, and we have time to get into all sorts of wider signalization issues. But one issue prompting this return visit is to check in on the citywide conversion of walk, don't walk signals of most of Minneapolis intersections to automated pedestrian recall. Automated pedestrian recall means people using the sidewalk need not press a big button to get a walk signal accompanying the green light cycle. And it was instituted last year at some of our help, and also as a COVID response for keep people from not necessarily touching fewer surfaces. Anyway, so that is kind of the long and the short of it. And we welcome all three of you. Who's kicking it off? Take it away.
Hey, good afternoon. This is Alan Klugman. Ben Brass is here. I believe we gave Ryan Anderson the day off, actually, so I think it's Ben and myself. I'm not sure if Ryan's on. If he's on, he can correct me. But Ben's going to share the PowerPoint, and then Ben will do primarily the beginning of the discussion, and then we intend to have an open discussion with you, and Ben and I will kind of tag team our responses. So with that, I will let Ben take it away, and thanks again.
All right.
Sure, sounds good. Good afternoon, everyone. You would like me to share the screen on my end, is that correct?
That'd be great.
Okay, happy to do so.
Uh-oh. What in Sam Hill? Okay.
So can everyone see my presentation up on the screen? Who is looking at a screen?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. All right. So yeah, thanks again for the introduction, and happy to be here this afternoon to respond to some questions and requests, and get into the discussion of pedestrian recall, automatic pedestrian recall. A lot of different ways to discuss it and talk about it. Peter, your intro on your end did a really good job kind of getting at what I was going to hope to get into a little bit at the beginning here, was just sort of framing up a little bit of the history and sort of how we got here. So thank you for that. I will also bring to the front, just sort of as we're getting into the discussion from the policy side of things, just sort of reminding the group, and of course the group is very aware of the Transportation Action Plan, and but just reminding specifically and remembering this is sort of on the top of our minds as well, the policy that's sort of directing our actions sort of to this point and moving ahead. The Transportation Action Plan directs us to modify traffic signal operations to give pedestrians a walk signal at signalized intersections without having to press a button, except for doing so would provide greater benefit to pedestrians, bicyclists, transit, and neighborhoods. It also directs us to explore permanent sign modifications to indicate whether the button needs to be pressed to get a walk phase or a longer walk phase. And also noting that the ADA requires these push buttons to be installed specifically at new intersections, new or newly reconstructed signalized intersections, to provide audio and vibrotactile information to pedestrians when those buttons are activated. Getting into just a little bit of the history, again, as was mentioned kind of up at the beginning, a lot of the recent changes to our practices and our implementation of pedestrian recall, automated pedestrian recall, was around the time of the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. Again, I wasn't personally involved with discussions specifically with this group, but I understand that it was a very positive effort, a very well-led and encouraged effort by this group. And then, we received some very good feedback and some very positive feedback as well in terms of the results of that effort, recognizing that it was a large effort on to implement this process, but then especially as it relates to at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, with the discussion of touching surfaces and trying to minimize contacts, all in the name of health and safety. This was a very a very strong effort. The information that was presented at the time was a temporary sign accompanying locations at signalized intersections with push buttons, saying that pushing a button is not required. It states that the walk signal will turn on automatically and to wait for the walk signal before crossing. At that time, around the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, I have March 2020, it may have been March, a little bit into April of 2020 when this was fully implemented. We have, we are out of the approximately 820 signals in the city of Minneapolis before the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, and that effort to convert some of those at that time. About 500 of our 820 signals were activated by push buttons to receive a walk phase, with the remaining 320 not needing to push a button, some sort of pre-timed operation, or automatically receiving the walk phase. And then, it sort of as part of the COVID response, all but about 50 of our intersections were put on automated recall, so pushing a button was not required to receive a walk signal. And then updating that information with operations as of today. Out of our 820 signals, we are now at the point where about 75 of our signals have the requirement of pushing a button to receive the walk signal, with still the remaining 745 on that automatic or automated recall. This, we can get into the details a little bit here coming up. I'm sure there's going to be some questions and everything. We're happy to get into it. Again, this was done through the time periods of starting as early as late last year, I'll say fall of last year, and then up through the present, where throughout the process of monitoring operations, the operational benefit of automated recall was basically not being realized at some of these intersections. Basically, what we're talking about is we're talking about intersections with very low pedestrian volume and intersections where there's also very low vehicle volume on the side streets, that were getting use of the operational benefit of the automated walk phase, but also, again, focusing on locations with low pedestrian volume as well. We can get into that in a little bit. But as far as an update of where our operations are, that's the long and short of it. We understand that, or we're hoping to kind of have a lot of opportunity here to discuss with the group, hear some questions, comments, things like that. So I will allow, if there's anything Alan would like to add to the presentation that we discussed, Alan, feel free to take the opportunity. Otherwise, we'd be happy to get into some discussion.
Yeah, maybe, hey, Ben, I'll just talk for 1/2 a minute. You go back to, I think it was your first slide after the cover sheet where we have the text from the TAP. Yeah, so just quick observation, then maybe we'll get into the questions and discussion. So I think you all know this, but if we kind of highlight some of the words there, let me get here. Except where doing so would provide greater benefit to pedestrians, bicyclists, transit, and neighborhoods. So that implies or suggests there's going to be some sort of analysis and determination. Probably not every signal in the city would go to PED recall, but there'd be some mechanism to decide what that number is. And I mean, it kind of goes without saying, as Ben said, with the onset of COVID and the desire from a health point of view to put signals to PED recall, we sort of leapfrog over that analysis step. We kind of went right to almost warp speed, put almost everything on PED recall. So I just wanted to maybe articulate that once again, or highlight that fact that we know this is the germane policy. We know we mean to act upon it. We do feel there's an analysis step that wants to occur, and we somewhat jumped over that last spring. So even when Ben talks about a few of them where we kind of dialed back, that's in keeping with this idea of thoughtfully looking at each intersection, making a determination. So I just wanted to kind of frame it that way, that I think we're now embarking on the idea of looking at what it means to implement this policy. We understand many signals are already at PED recall, but they kind of got there in a different reason. So just wanted to, note that as we begin the discussion here. And with that, I will be quiet because I think there's probably gonna be some questions or comments, and maybe we'll go from there.
All right, Alan, Ben, thank you. I'm sure there's a lot of discussion questions to be had, and hewing to the raising our hand within teams the best we can. Let's start that evolution. And I see Raina quick on the draw. Hello, Raina.
Hi, everybody. Quick question on the permanent sign modifications. I think that would be a good idea to get permanent signs, because I think some of the laminated ones that were tacked up have come off. What's kind of the progress on that?
Ben, you want that or you want me?
Yeah, sure. Sort of as Alan was getting at, kind of like some level of evaluation, some level of, taking a look and sort of putting this more formally into action. I think that's going to be included in that is, how does that get communicated? How does the difference between this, this intersection pushing a button is required, this intersection of pushing a button is not required? How does that get communicated? I would hope and expect would be kind of part of that. Again, we're still, as Alan will start describing a little bit, sort of not to say post-pandemic, but post implementation and post, some of the early impacts and early effects of that effort of putting this larger number in. And so now, kind of, as he said, dialing back and taking a look again, sort of, still expecting to kind of take that opportunity to take the big picture look. But I would hope that's part of the way of looking at a big picture.
Yeah, and maybe one or two details are added, and Ben can help me out with this. This is going to sound funny, what I'm about to say. The current version of the traffic manual that we must abide by, the Uniform Manual on Traffic Control Devices, doesn't really have a sign that speaks to the, no need to push a button here, need to push a button there. So there's a little bit of an intricacy about working with that. We can get around that, but I just want to let you know there's something we need to work with within that. And then the second thing, I just want to be really honest with you. Clearly we're gonna, I'm talking very generally here, clearly we're gonna leave a substantial number of signals on PED recall. Once we do our analysis, there's gonna be many on PED recall. And the notion of putting out signs, that's gonna take a while. And I don't wanna suggest to anyone that that's gonna be a real quick effort. Making the signs, procuring the signs, installing the signs, once we've thoughtfully considered what our system's gonna be. So we did it rather quickly with the zip ties and laminated signs. I think when we do real signs, that gets to be a larger effort. And just one more detail, say, even issues on which signals have push buttons, but not the ADA push buttons. They might be treated different than the ones with ADA push buttons. So there's just going to be a little bit more there that once we get into the details, that's not the kind of thing we're going to be able to shoot out quite as quickly as we did with the laminated signs a year and a half ago.
All right, Christopher Hoffer.
Yes, thank you. In my opinion, I think that uniformity of operation is a value unto itself, particularly in light of really clear signage. I think the default will be for pedestrians to push the sign anyway if they're not sure in a quick fashion if this is 10, 15, 20, 25% of whatever signals are not automatic. I think that uniformity needs to factor in, or should factor in, to your analysis under that TAP Action 2.1. So that's just my thoughts.
Okay, thanks.
In general, what rationales, I guess hypothetically, would be used to justify removing automatic recall? Like I would give a specific example. This one of the unlucky 25 to have returned connects two parks, Diamond Lake and Pearl Park, at 54th and Diamond Lake Road and Portland. So what are I guess what are your realities, or what are you facing there to what are the rationales that would revert automated, that would push you to revert automated recall?
Yeah, so getting at it a little bit in what I was mentioning before, but it was, through a lot of observation from our group who's monitoring traffic operations, who are monitoring the way that these signalized intersections are functioning. Again, it was locations where we were finding that the demand for that walk phase was, again, there's not a specific threshold. There's not the volume of data that's necessarily needed for, to set a, can't give you a specific number, but basically where the proportion of cycles where that walk phase was being served is, was low, and then also that that benefit of having that walk phase was not seen elsewhere. So again, it was from observing the operational demand, and we're seeing that the
Well, and
time.
Ben, can I jump in on this specific one? And Peter, help me out. There's 820 signals in the city. I think I know most of them, not all of them. Is this one where we have what we call a ped scramble? It's a T intersection. I'm looking at my other map on the other screen.
We did have it, but that's what we did have, right? It was
Right.
that just like Hollywood and Vine, a ped scramble.
It was a field trip there. I've never been to Hollywood and Vine, but I think this is one. So I'm going to generalize and then come back to your intersection.
Yeah.
So as Ben was saying, and again, this was kind of early days, or it is early days. We're kind of looking at how we want to analyze these. The 2 or 3 sort of classic general reasons of why we would look to take a signal off ped recall. One, I will say, would be a multimodal analysis, where we're trying to fit everything in. We're trying to make the system safe and comfortable for all users, all modes. That always guides everything we do. We always want to start with that. And as we're trying to make things safe and comfortable and efficient for all modes, some of the intersections where we're looking to take ped recall off have to do with transit priority. So we have some major transit corridors, some of the bus rapid transit lines. Won't get into all the details unless you folks want me to, but we have some operational flexibility where when the transit vehicle comes and if it's running late, we want to assign it some extra time so it makes a light or doesn't miss a light or what have you. When we're on ped recall, we lose that flexibility. During the early days of the pandemic, when there was fewer buses running and fewer people on them and just less traffic, we thought the benefit of transit priority kind of wasn't there. We took that away by going to ped recall. So one of the, I'll say, family of intersections we'll be looking at to maybe rethink has to do with balancing transit. So that's one example. Another example is, I think, your intersection specifically, where we have a limited number in town, where we have what we call a ped scramble. I think everyone's familiar with that term, but basically it's where no cars go for a certain period of time and only pedestrians go in every direction. So sometimes you hear the word ped scramble. You also hear the word Barnes dance. The first traffic engineer, like in the 30s, who did this, fellow's last name was Barnes, so it's sometimes called the Barnes dance. We used to have a ped scramble at 54th and Portland, Diamond Lake. With ped recall, we can't do that. So we kind of made the decision that a more safe, more convenient, more user-friendly mode for the peds here was to, if you push a button, you'll get a very quick service with a ped scramble. So that, I'll say, that was a conscious decision that our interpretation was that's a better ped treatment than ped recall. So a little bit of a possible, what should I say, non-intuitive thing, that I think there's intersections in town where pushing a button gives you better service. And so it gets to a philosophical thing of what's good ped service, what's good ped treatment. And if I push a button, do I get better treatment than waiting for a ped recall? So that's, I think in general, there's some of the intersections we want to look at to say, I can give you quicker service with pushing a button than the way I can set it up with ped recall. And I can get into the details, just super brief, like minimum time. Every time a phase comes up, it has to go a certain amount of time. Is it in a coordinated phase or not? So, you cook all that stuff together and sometimes you say, I think it's better for the peds to push a button. Third one, and then I'll be quiet. Third one is some of these, I'm just going to call them oddball places, like freeway off ramps. And it's not the direction that's going, say, with the street that's going across the ramp, but it's like the direction of the ramp where we're just not seeing any peds. And by by making that an actuated face from either a car or the very, 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 very few pets who get there, by making that actuated, we're able to leave the main line, I'll call it, on, which we see as more pet friendly, because as you're walking across along the line, main line, if you will, at the ramp, you're going to most likely have a green. So we kind of had, I don't think we did them willy-nilly, and we kind of had a rationale for them. But again, back to yours, it was the pet scramble where we thought that's a better treatment for pets. You have to push a button to get it. We thought that was a better treatment than the pet recall.
Okay, I'll follow up with you after the meeting on that, because I want to move on to some other questions too. Thank you for that expansive answer. Austin, you were up and your hand was up.
No,
Okay.
My question was answered. You can move on.
Terrific. Thank you. Julia Curran.
Hi. I wanted to say, firstly, thank you so much for that rapid work. It was really impressive, especially seeing how not every agency, even in public health, was able to be that flexible and to really look to see what could be done to help mitigate this emergency. So a lot of respect to you, Alan, and everyone working with you for that responsiveness. I have a couple of questions, just as somebody who has spent too much time sitting at intersections and watching how they cycle. It's fairly clear that how people use actuated buttons and what the city expects might be two different things. I don't believe we have data to know if people push buttons but go when it's clear, if there's intersections where I've seen, 8, 10 pedestrians at all four corners, it's an actuated button and no one pushes it. So there's definitely places that people don't have to need to, or some has, since there's no ongoing feedback. My question is, talking about usage and talking about prioritizing pedestrians, it doesn't seem like we know a ton about how people use these, but we do know that in winter, people who are using wheelchairs, or in other seasons, people who have mobility issues, are the ones who can't cross the street without the aid of these signs. They're the people who can't make it across quickly enough, or are just going to be a lot more vulnerable. So you talked about how the system, I'm sorry, this is sort of convoluted. I'm trying to get all my thoughts in one line. You talked about how this system is predicated on, we're going to do a thorough shift. We're going to look at the data, but we know that in the winter, the system isn't working at the bare minimum. That actuated buttons are an accessibility failure because property owners, even those clearing sidewalks, do not clear buttons for people to push them. And they get blocked again by windrows. It just is really difficult. So I guess the other time we know people can't use them is when people are biking in the street. They don't trigger the actuation on the kinds of intersections you're describing. Bikes aren't heavy or don't have the right metal composition to be able to trigger that crossing. So the side effect of having automatic recall for bicyclists seems to be that we have created a system where people can bike across the street safely, that they don't have to kind of figure out that it's never going to change, get off their bike, walk over to a button, hope the button's accessible and push it. And it, like, given those two cases that have existed pre-pandemic and will continue to exist through this, I wonder how you're going to get data or balance those needs of basic accessibility for everyone who bicycles in the street and everyone who has any mobility concerns through the winter.
Sorry, I had to unmute there, Julia. Let me start, and then Ben, please jump in. Couple points there: bikes in the street and accessibility and winter mobility. Let me take them backwards. In terms of bikes in the streets, I'll just say, Julia, lots happening there. As we rebuild intersections, we're going to a video detection system. We've rebuilt hundreds of intersections in the city the last 10 years. So one of the reasons we went to video is because of its ability to pick up bicyclists. So more and more and more, we're getting to intersections where I'd say we really do have good bike detection, including on the side streets. So we're kind of entering a new era where that's maybe possibly less of an issue, and we'll continue to improve in that. Another thing I would say about the moving back to the winter maintenance, that's a tough one. And I hear what you're saying. I totally hear what you're saying. And I think it's part of, again, I want to go back to the fact that we will do an analysis. We will factor these things in. We understand the notion that there's times of the year people have trouble getting to buttons. There's other individuals who maybe year round have trouble getting to buttons. As part part of us looking long-term here, and I don't want to overpromise, but part of us looking long-term is we're looking at technologies and methods where people can be detected passively. And Ben knows more about the technology than I do. I think we've even tested a few in the shop, so to speak. So they're not really here today, but they're coming. And we have even some new generations of buttons where, Ben, help me out here. You either don't have to press it or you just have to get close.
It's basically a sort of a waving actuation, where
Right.
it's and there's a distance, and again, we're not at implementation, but yeah, hopefully that's one of the main things that hopes to cut down on is the last little distance there.
So, again, it's not today, Julia. I'm not gonna lie and tell you that, but it's the sorts of things we're looking at. What is our system today? What's our system in the very near future? And we just want to be cognizant of what other opportunities we have, both with technology, with some of our other detection. So, I'm not trying to talk around your question. I'm not trying to avoid it, but I just want to be honest with you to say we are looking at a number of things, and they all kind of work into that theme of how do you safely detect a pedestrian or provide service for them? Is it only through a strict ped recall, or are there some other means and methods that provide that service?
I totally hear that, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because I've been pushing for us to tour the traffic building when we get a chance, when it might be open again, and just to be able to see that in action. I got to, and it was fascinating.
Yeah.
But I am curious, will there be a default, since there is no other method of recall for bicyclists at some intersections till they get upgraded, and for people using wheelchairs where those corners are not being cleared? Will there be some way of making it so that basic accessibility for people using wheelchairs and mobility devices and people biking is the baseline, and then we shift beyond that?
Yeah, can I just say, Julia, I think that's a way to think about it. I don't know that we have a final answer on that yet, but I hear what you're saying is like, what would your baseline be and what's your exception versus the other way around? And
The priority is people with disabilities and people using all modes versus vehicle traffic, regardless of if it's low volume sites.
Yeah. Okay. No. Good point. Yep. Okay. Thanks.
Hi, Barb. Your hand's up.
My question is, with all the considerations that you guys are taking in and the possible changes to how we communicate whether people need to push button or not, my concern is for people that, we can put up signs, but for people that have vision issues and can't read signs, what will you be doing in the interim to make so that people with vision problems coming to us expecting a certain kind of signal and then it's changed, how will you be communicating? Is there going to be automated communication or voice communication, or what's in the works for them?
Yeah, and maybe I'm not fully understanding. Are you talking about if we change any of the current signals, or are you talking just long-term? And if we change,
as you're changing things and things are changing and you're evolving with this whole process, which could take a more time, is according to what you said, what will be done to ensure that people who are used to a certain kind of signal and don't have vision acuity can figure out what's going on at that signal if things have changed?
Right. And again, maybe for my clarification, so like right now we have about 40% of our signals have the APS, accessible pedestrian signals. Are you primarily talking about those, or say the ones that don't have the APS?
Well, if any of the ones, like if you're changing the ones that don't have the APS and you're changing what they are, how are you going to communicate that to members of the community that have vision issues?
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Good point. I think our standard process is for the ones that don't have the APS, we have the sign that, and hopefully it's readable by most people, the sign that, talks, if the pushing the buttons required, the sign, the plaque will be there. And for the ones, our plan is for the ones where you don't have to push the button to have an equally robust sign that indicates that. I guess where I'm in a little bit of a quandary on myself here is, for a person who's not relying on the APS button but has vision difficulties, I'd have to think about that. I don't, other than the signs that we have out there, and there's certain sizes that fit on the pole, I'm not sure that we've explored other techniques. Obviously the APS is our tool we use. when we don't have that, we pretty much rely on the signs, kind of the standard size signs. So that honestly, that might be one we need to think more about, that if there's kind of some hybrid for people who have challenges out there.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to make a note on that.
All right. Looks like we're wrapping up here. When I walk at the borders at Richfield and Bloomington, where I find crossing the crosstown or crossing 494 on busy streets, I can press the walk signal, walk the beg button mid green and get the walk signal, get a walk indication mid green. Now, if it being the case on the signs that we have on our that say do not enter the intersection, do not enter the crosswalk, other than on a walk signal, and I assume that's a citationable ordinance otherwise, would that be something, to be able to, is that an implementable idea at any level in the city of Minneapolis? So to give us, let a person using the sidewalk push the button mid green and get their walk cycle without having to wait for the next red, etc.
Okay, Ben, that's a sophisticated timing one. I'm going to ask you to start, and then I'm going to offer a couple comments.
I was going to say getting down into the weeds, but that's a good thing because that's where I live. So what you described, sort of pushing, you say you're walking along. If I can, if I'm understanding correctly, kind of what I'm describing is walking along what might be called the main road or the main line. If you're walking in that direction, you push in the middle of the green. Your walk comes up, whereas that's not what you might get if you are trying to cross what is the road with busier traffic. Again, it comes down to some details in terms of how much time is remaining on a phase. Very often a pedestrian phase, when the walk sign is up is tied to a vehicle green phase, and so how much time is left on that phase, whether you consider call it a vehicle phase or a pedestrian phase, how much time is there left? That's a big indicator of that. A lot of times, again, the way the system was designed, the way a lot of those things were timed was on those approaches with lower volumes of pedestrians and vehicles traveling along those. There's just less time. There's less wiggle room. There's less freedom to bring that back up.
Hey, Ben, can I jump in with something, and then I'll ask you to carry on. But tell me if I'm right on this. I think when you reference some of those nearby suburbs and how in the streets they operate and the way they operate them, I think where they differ a bit from us is we operate in a grid. And so we're looking at sort of two-way traffic flow. And one of our criteria, if you will, one of our desires is to keep cycle lengths as low as possible so that we see that as being more ped friendly. So we want to serve north-south, we want to serve east-west. We don't want to have a lot of slack time in there. And so this notion of, if say east-west is the main street we're talking about, in mid-green, can I push a button and get more green or more ped time? Kind of not, because I need to go to north-south cross street. And I think a lot of the suburban streets or arterials run more as a single arterial, where maybe 6 or 8 or 10 signals are tied together in an arterial, and there's not those crossing sets of signals. And they kind of have, I'll say, more slack in the system, and or they favor mainline and will take away from cross street. So if you push that button mid-green, they'll kind of say, oh, someone needs some time, let me stay here rather than going to the cross street. And our paradigm is more like, X seconds north-south, Y seconds east-west, back to north-south, back to east-west. And we don't quite have, I'm saying this at kind of my basic level. Ben understands it better than I do and gets into the details. But at that basic level, I'm kind of saying we don't quite have as much slack to sort of extend a phase, as you were saying, for the walk, because I need to get to the next one pretty soon.
And it wouldn't have to be. And I, like I said, I will take everyone's step, and I'll leave this alone. But it wouldn't need necessarily just when you can't. If I don't get to that signal when I got to press a button, and get a walk signal before it turns green, and then I have to wait for the entire green and another red to get red. That's just a interstitial walk that lets a person enter the cross legally, not system wide or whatever, but if there's place you can implement that. If that's an idea that could be thought about, that'd be
okay. No, I appreciate what you're saying as a selective tool, but a really good point. Probably not one we can use at the bulk of our signals, probably just because how we grid time them.
Yeah, we're okay. Thank you. That's a good answer. Julia.
I've got a couple of questions that I want to go through kind of fast. The First is there's been a number of traffic signal errors that I've seen specifically with walk signs, and it seems to have increased recently, which with everything that you've been doing with this, but signs that have been as high as 100, signs that have been 45 regularly for weeks, counting down, and then all of a sudden, like, clearly it doesn't take that long. So the numbers are starting out at really high numbers or odd numbers, just changing in the middle of the street. I've seen signals where the walk sign is burned out, and or the entire sign is. That's been a problem on one ways where going contraflow, where you have no other system to tell you whether or not you have the light. And I've heard, and I'm not sure where to tell them how to report safety hazard traffic signals like that, where the timing abandons you in the middle of the road, or something's not visible. When I've reported these, it's been at least weeks, even trying to escalate it. So I'd love to know what our best.
Yeah, Julie, you said you had a couple. Let me stop you and answer that one directly. You've hit a hot button for me. Not that I'm mad at you. It's a hot button for our industry. That these countdown timers, which are a wonderful tool, when they get towards the end of their life, or sometimes intermittently, the way they fault is by doing that really, I'll just say, incorrect, odd, screwy timing you're referring to, where 100 shows up, or 99, or it goes from 40 to 0, and it never should have been at 40. That's a fault in those, and we replace those as soon as we find out about them. We tend to say, please call 311, report those. If you've done that and don't feel you're getting good response, just call me, email me, you have my number. We found the number of those a few years back when some of these countdown timers get to a certain age, that's how they fail, or they sometimes, I'll say, intermittently fail that way. The best call I ever got was Councilmember Andrew Johnson. He called me from the corner of 4th Street and 4th Avenue, right by City Hall, and said, he described exactly what you're saying. He said, okay, that's not the way it's supposed to be. We'll get out and fix that. So if it's burned out, let me know. Clearly, if it's doing that screwball timing, let me know. That's just a fault in the equipment, and we replace those as soon as we find out about them.
Is that something, should I refrain from giving your direct contact when I hear other people reporting it? Or is, like, 311 is not working for people for this, whether it's, I'm not sure what they're saying, but it's not changing when people are reporting it.
Look, the company policy is to direct you to 311, so I kind of have to say that. Julie, I know you, I trust you. If you see one, just shoot me an email. I don't know what to tell you. We want to get those fixed, and we'll figure out why 311 isn't handling these. They go to the top of our priority list when they get to our shop. I want to be very, very clear in telling you that this is not something that we, shove to the side and say, we'll get to it when we get to it. When we find out about those, we replace them, because you can't be out there with a 30 that goes to 0 when you're middle of the intersection. That's not what we went out there. So let me know, and we'll always address those.
36 and Nicollet is one.
Okay.
I'm also, and it's not all 4 corners. I think it's the crossing northbound on the west side, or crossing southbound on the west side of the street, if I'm remembering correctly, but I can double check that and email you. I'm also, as we learn more about traffic signals, it seems like they're fundamentally kind of, aside from where they're with trains, they are really car-based infrastructure, rather than providing assistance for pedestrians. We don't need them in a walk-only area. And aside from safety around trains, which can't break, it seems like it would be, do we have plans? I guess twofold question. One is, what kinds of plans do we have to consider when we remove traffic signals? And the second part of that is, at what point will we put in the auditory pedestrian signals along the light rail downtown, so that people with visual impairments can be crossing safely, where it actually, the machine can't break?
Okay, so 2 questions there. The auditory downtown, and then removal signals. Let me start with the first one. And Julia, I don't know how much time we have today, so I'll be brief on this one. We may need to talk more about this. We have generally—
Alan, on that note, this is Matthew. Let's have this be the last sort of 2-part question, and then move on.
Okay, cool, thanks. So maybe we won't fully answer this one tonight, but I'll just say, we've been more along the lines of keeping signals in because we see them as a ped safety element. We have other devices like flasher systems and warning systems and whatnot. We've had a few projects with our partner agencies like Hennepin County where based on a traditional traffic count based warrant, the county would want to take the signal out. We've had some where we've kept the signal in and paid 100% with our own funds. The county won't cost share with us. So again, maybe it's a topic for another night. We've tended to see the signal as a ped safety device in that case where, for example, the county's going to say there's not enough cars, there's not enough peds, there's not enough cars to warrant a signal, take the signal out. And, we've been more advocates for keeping the signal in. So again, I'll leave it there. That wants to be another discussion probably. And then on the downtown ones, I know we've started to replace them. We did 5th and Nicollet last year, I believe, or 2 years ago. I think it was last year. We added APS to those 4 quadrants. The Hennepin and 5th is being done with that major construction project. So we've been working with Metro Transit, and I don't know what the timeline will be to get to all of them, but we have identified that as something we're working to try to bring those up to proper standards.
Thank you.
Yep, you bet.
All right, and I'm not seeing any other hands. I do have one last item though that was suggested to me would fit within Signalization's portfolio, and I have some photos to show. The topic is construction season and temporarily placed safety signs, as in the brand and also the item of where. And let's just get, and Millicent, are you there to bring up that PDF? We can just kind of scroll through it. I don't intend to go through these case by case, but just to show some photos as examples of what the issue is, and that is sidewalks being blocked willy-nilly by signs used to demarcate temporary construction sites or road construction, where overall the sidewalks are used as the default placement. And Julia pointed out to me a couple of cases last week. I got a picture of those too, where when they're not used in the traffic, they're set sideways on a sidewalk, which make them a double hazard, for especially at night. And I got the PDF here.
Millicent, do you have them, or do you want me to pull them up? I can do that if you'd like. I'll go ahead and pull it up, Peter.
Thanks. Thanks, Christopher. All right.
Is that the right one?
It is. And so what we're seeing at the top one's like a good example. Fits on the boulevard. That's a sign that fits on the boulevard. That's the Portland project at the crosstown. Next one shows a super wide sign that belongs in the street. Designed, it looks like, as wide as that sign is, it looks like it belongs in the street. Has been on the sidewalk 2 out of the past 3 years for projects in that area. And I'm aware of certain activists who have moved that sign out to a parking lane facing traffic and out of the way, and it's been moved back by again, I don't know. Moving back, next one down. There's a sign in the same area where you could see that there's definitely a sign sign sizes that fit, that stay out of the way as best as they can, and that's an example of that, a good sign. And then is there one more at the bottom? I don't remember. Yeah. Okay. So I guess on that one it's like if that looks like a good placement. So to be, generally, so it's in a parking lane facing drivers, but it gets moved away because it's not on the side of the street where the drivers are coming from. So, but it's absolutely big enough. So, okay. So we've had some discussions leading up to this meeting about it. So the thought was suggested it'd be a good place to at least address it in brief, as to where these signs are blocking the sidewalk, to whom are they best? Is that kind of redress sent? Is it the 311? We have examples. We have testimony from members that 311 has attempted to palm it off to the number on the back of the sign, to the safety signs company or whoever else, which seems not fitting with who pays the bills, and that. In general, are the issues like who is in charge of placing them at the beginning of these projects? Is it the contractor who's doing the actual work, the actual road work? Is it the safety signs people? Are they told to come out and place it wherever they choose, or what? So
Sure.
who places them?
Yeah,
and
yeah, Peter, maybe
how do we fix them?
I can make a few comments. Yeah, I guess I'm unmuted. I'll make a few comments and then, we can go from there. So first of all, you're right in that any of these orange signs you've seen tend to be owned by subcontractors, like warning lights, safety signs. Q3 is another one. Their name's on the back. I think in virtually any utility or road project that you see, the main contractor has hired one of these specialty firms to do the temporary traffic control and the sign placement. So step one is, those are the firms that physically place it, or maybe that's step two. Step one is there's a plan sheet or a detail or something that tells them where to place it. They always use some element of judgment relative to safety, do things fit, etc. They're clear, they're very clear direction from us is not to impede ped walkways, not to impede the PAR. We can't be any more clear on that. The flip side of that is, it's a big city. It's hard to manage and maintain all these. And I think from a process point of view, when it goes to 311, so I don't think calling safety signs or warning lights is the obligation of the citizen who reported this. That's more like if we see a sign that's been strewn or thrown out in the bushes or something, whose was it? But I think what we want to do with these things and with a lot of construction related activities is send it back to the construction project and their project manager, because they should be managing that endeavor. Our division, the Traffic and Parking Services division, maybe not me and Ben personally, our division works with what we call lane use and construction obstructions and permitting and detours and whatnot. So we have a hand in it, and we try to keep an eye on these contractors. But I think the best place, and maybe we can work with 311 on both their scripts and their responses and their actions, is when something comes in relative to construction, it's usually pegged to a specific project, and the construction project manager is really the closest person on the ground to work with that subcontractor and get things set up. So that's maybe one point. The second point I want to tell you, just to give you a little bit of framework for this, is this overall topic of right-of-way management is a huge topic. We're actually bringing on additional staff within Public Works to manage what happens in the right-of-way, and it's everything from, different utilities wanting to be in the same space, to permitting, to things like this. How do we maintain clear paths and walkways? So it is something the city knows is an issue and is addressing. But again, I think in terms of specific actions, making your call or your email to 311 with specifics about the site, they should really be directing those to the construction project manager. We get some of them, they just sort of come in over the transom, so to speak, because we deal with that stuff, but we try to make sure that actual project is aware of it, is kind of minding their house, so to speak.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah,
I appreciate the time on that. Yeah, and,
absolutely.
Joe, you want to finish us off here on this topic?
Yeah, I really urge you to follow through with 311, because they've been the ones to consistently tell me to contact the company on the back. And those seem to be the companies that, after I move them, place them back in the right of way. And I'm also curious if maybe at some point you could share with us what kind of oversight there is, if the project managers are out walking the site or using wheelchairs to, weekly, monthly, how often, because there are some, as Peter mentioned, where it's year in and year out, and there's some that are quasi-permanent, like at Hennepin and Franklin. There's one that's been there for at least 5 years, and you can see a very clear desire line that is not accessible around it. So I would love to have you be the best person within TP Transportation and what is it, the parking division?
Well, yeah, Julie, we get involved with lane use and obstruction permits. There's also permitting, everything from utility permitting, and then there's the road builders. So there's a lot of us that kind of have a hand in this. But I think we're all trying to be on the same page of maintaining those, clear pathways, those clear walkways. I will acknowledge it's tough. I mean, we have a lot of construction going on. We have the quick hit utility stuff where they get a permit for a week or two. They're in, they're out. Sometimes it's hard to manage them. They have like moving operations where tomorrow's a little different than today. So I don't want to mislead you. It's always going to be a challenge. But we'll try to do better, and first priority is to maintain safe ped access. It always is.
All right.
Hey, this
Alan.
is Matthew. We should move on.
All right.
All right,
Behind
thanks,
the roll.
folks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Ben, you've been super generous with your time. Thank you for the 47 minutes plus.
Okay.
It's been a great topic, great discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks to the committee. Thanks, Peter. Yep, bye-bye.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks for everybody for that. Next up is we have Danielle Elkins, been able to hold a workshop on micro mobility and bike share, scooter share. And welcome, Danielle. Been looking forward to this.
Hey everyone. Do we have the PowerPoint to load up? I do it.
If you just want to pull it up on yours, you can do that, Danielle. Otherwise, if you want me to pull it up, I'm happy to do that as well.
Find it real quick. I was thinking you were going to do it. Sorry, everybody.
All part of the fun.
Yeah.
Love that. Oh, no. The green light should come on pretty quick with countdown. Oh, no.
Otherwise, Danielle, Chris could do it too.
Yeah, I just got the one from that we put online. So if you want me to just
Oh, there we go. We're good.
It's fine.
Mobility presentation.
Okay. So I will just kind of talk through this presentation, and at the end, if there are any questions or particularly feedback, I think the biggest thing that I'm looking for in terms of feedback is how you would like to provide any kind of feedback for the RFP process that's coming up for both bikes and scooters in the city, and just any other kind of issues that you're seeing. So like I said, my name is Danielle Elkins. I've been with the city for almost 3 years, but I've been an employee and kind of running this new team since last December. The way that we define mobility is all things shared mobility, but also advanced mobility. So my kind of my group oversees things like mobility as a service, so integration with tech platforms, personal delivery devices, basically sidewalk robots, drones, and also the Mobility Hub pilot program, as well as anything around connected or automated vehicles. So I was just going to start by explaining a little bit about our Mobility Hub program. We unfortunately have not been able to deploy the Mobility Hub pilot this summer because of delays in a MnDOT grant that we were awarded for this year's pilot project. But the good news is that with that money, we'll be able to have a really robust and well thought out pilot next summer. And we're still going to do a couple of locations for the kind of the last couple months of the season to test out some really specific things to inform our capital program around mobility hubs. For those that aren't familiar, mobility hubs are essentially a concept where you can cluster multiple modes of transportation together to try and eliminate single occupancy vehicle trips, to reduce having to go on extra trips to get access to different goods and services. And just basically knowing that if you go to a mobility hub, you'll be able to find multiple modes of transportation to get you where you need to go, and also help really with that last mile connectivity. So usually there is either a high capacity bus line or a transit, an LRT stop adjacent to this, and then we add scooter and bike parking and other amenities at that location to make it easier for people to take different modes. And we're really trying to test out what are all the amenities and different things that could be in a future mobility hub, whether it's having more seating, plantings, bathrooms, kiosks that include wayfinding information, pointing to all the different modes, integration with community resources, so partnerships with the library system and human services, locker systems to help with package delivery and minimize truck deliveries within the city, improved lighting, heating, that sort of thing. And then also partnerships with community groups to do ambassador programming at the sites to help people engage in these new modes and connect them to services. This was our pilot program, our locations from last summer for 2020. We went from about 12 in 2019 to about 25 last summer. And we've been really focused on ACP 50 areas. So a cluster in North Minneapolis, a cluster in South Minneapolis, the kind of West Bank, Cedar Riverside area, and then a couple within Northeast. And then we've always had a couple in downtown that were like major locations that we're trying to test specific issues at. For example, at 12th Street and 3rd Avenue South, we closed a slip lane and did a full installation of seating area to see could we, you know, turn former slip lanes into kind of shared community space. And our plan for the 2022 season is to increase the number to at least 30 pilot locations next summer to test these different concepts out. So the different options, the different elements that we've had out during our pilot seasons, we've done the blue blocks, which I'm sure you've seen, the kind of look like Swiss cheese out there that have been a really kind of brand identifier for where the mobility hubs are. They're movable on purpose so that people can move them around different areas and help inform the capital program of where do you want to see seating. A lot of times we see people move either the seating into transit center stations, and so we know, okay, we need to have more seating within transit stations, or people move them like next to a library because they're trying to get an outlet to charge their phone. So it is really informative for us to understand what gaps these are filling. We've also done a lot of testing around signage so far in terms of letting people know key things that are nearby and how much it would take to get there based on walking or biking or scooter. We're also then going to be testing a lot more in terms of what we're kind of referring to as mode finding versus wayfinding, of how do you get between different modes and know how to find them. So as we start to implement EV car share, how do we have really good directions that show people when they get off the bus how to get to an EV car share location or where to find bikes or scooters. And it's going to be really important kind of testing some of this, especially in the winter climate, seeing what we can do with snow so we can still make it easy for people to navigate between these different modes. We've also implemented parking, so extra kind of movable parking for bikes and scooters. And that's going to be a really big focus going forward, is testing a lot of different types of parking situations, whether they're charging or regular. Where are the best places to put them? How do we integrate these into these mobility hubs? And we're going to be doing a lot of testing and implementation with Metro Transit as well at kind of key transit hubs around the city that align with Metro Transit service. And then we've done a lot with our ambassador programming to work with these community organizations to get people signed up for the low income pricing programs for both bikes and scooters. So Nice Ride for All, and then the community programs for both the Bird and Lyft. And then we also did programming with Hennepin County Libraries, where we have basically had a locker system where they stored face masks, hand sanitizer, booklets on job resources, human service resources for those in need, to figure out, is there a way that we could also connect people to human services using these mobility hubs, which was really successful. So our ambassador program, the first time we've done this was last summer. We partnered with organizations in North Minneapolis and Cedar Riverside to implement different types of things. So partially it's testing maintenance. How do we deal with the long-term maintenance of these sites? Partially it's, like I said, education, encouraging people to sign up for these low-income pricing programs, explaining to them how they can get access to these programs, and also just getting people comfortable with the first ride on a bike or a scooter and helping them to adjust the vehicle, whatever they need. That was really successful, and particularly in North Minneapolis, I think the feedback was that a lot of people felt like it was really good to have somebody consistently at the mobility hubs to answer their questions, to point them towards community resources, and just also to provide a safe community space. We were really lucky that even with budget cuts last year, we got a NACDO grant to help kind of backfill some of those budget cuts to enable us to keep doing the ambassador programming, which was really great. And then a really kind of positive thing is that when we've done all of the data analysis on bikes and scooters, at the end of the year, we really wanted to know, did mobility hubs increase the amount of people using bikes or scooters? This is particularly showing scooter data. So we chose on the left side here, if somebody started at the Penn and Laurie mobility hub, these are all in blue, all the places that they've traveled to. So really shows kind of great movement between these hubs and around the city. It's a great access point. And then on the right side here is a comparison of scooter ridership before the hub was put in versus during when the hubs were out. And you can basically see that having mobility hubs out increased scooter ridership, particularly at the places where we had ambassadors and did additional education and programming. So for example, like Penn and Laurie, it was a significant increase because of the programming that we had there. So that was really positive. And then of course in Cedar Riverside as well had really big jumps once we put the mobility hubs out. So good way to see actual success within the program. So I mentioned, this is going to be kind of pushed more to 2022, but the things that we're really focused on are the signage pieces, the lighting, the locker systems, figuring out bike and scooter parking systems. So starting to acquire some technology, testing it for maintenance and usability, and getting as much feedback from the community of, are these things working? Do we like them? What types of different parking would we like to see in these? And having all of that information to then inform a capital program, which we anticipate as we try and go for regional and federal funding between 2023 and 2024. And then also continuing to do our ambassador programming and engagement efforts of education, getting people signed up for these programs. Some stats in here from the scooter programming. We had pretty big change between 2018, 2019, where we just jumped up and had a huge amount of increase in trips, but then we lost a significant amount last summer because of the pandemic. We lost a lot more than I think some other cities. And primarily what the data is showing us is that partially it's because we had a lot more to lose. We got so many new rides in 2019, particularly from people that were actually commuting to work. So we had a lot of day trips, whereas a lot of other US cities primarily had kind of evening recreational trips. And so when you go from 2019 to 2020, you can actually see in the data that we lost most of the day trips because people were not commuting to work anymore, not going to lunch anymore, working from home. And most of the trips ended up being more recreational or evening or running errand type trips at night. So it's going to be really interesting to see how we can compare 2021 data. We don't have that yet to be able to show what the change is going to be. But I will say, I feel like ridership has so far been up significantly this year. Another really important piece for us was just figuring out the percentage of trips in our ACP 50 areas. And the biggest thing is like within our scooter contracts, we have a goal of they at least have to place 30% of the scooters within ACP 50 areas. And we were hoping to at least hold steady kind of in the number of trips that were happening in those areas. And thankfully we did pretty much hold steady though, even though we lost a significant amount of our trips from 2019 to 2020. We had both years around 20% of trips that were in ACPs, so they started or ended in an ACP 50 area. So that was good news that we're holding on that. And just a glimpse of where people went on the scooters for 2020, they went all over the city. So again, similar to 2019, people are touching almost every single street in the city or trail in the city. So that's really positive that it's getting people to a lot of different places. The big change for 2020, which I'm sure this group is interested in, was that we added the lock to requirement. So it is now required that a scooter has to be locked to either public parking, bike parking facility, a street sign, or a meter hitch, which are the circular kind of on parking meters. And we also had added equity distribution requirements, like I mentioned, where 30% of the scooters have to be distributed between the 3 ACP 50 areas. We've adjusted a little bit based on feedback from the community, as well as changes in the ACP 50 program by Met Council, which I can answer questions if anyone's interested about that. And also coupled with the mobility hub deployment and a lot of the engagement, which of course was, even though we had a lot of challenges with engagement in 2020, we still had the ambassador program, which got us a lot of really great feedback. Just some examples of some of the artwork and signage that we've put out to explain to people the appropriate riding and parking rules around scooters. We've updated our new website as well with a lot of the different rules and restrictions of that, and hoping to use a lot more of this artwork to explain to people why it's so important to park and ride appropriately. And then, like I mentioned, we're really working on infrastructure for bike parking and scooter parking so that you're giving people a good place to park the vehicles that is not blocking the pedestrian walkway. So we were really lucky that we got some racks from the University of Minnesota that we were able to put in our mobility hubs last summer. And then at the same time, we had 1,500 new meter hitches that were installed in our parking meters. And we'll continue, like I said, to install a lot more bike parking as a part of this program. This is a little bit just about comparing 2019 to 2020 in terms of complaints within the 311 and 911 system. We've had a kind of a mix of feedback in the 2021 season. The difficulty is that we've had a small number of individuals reporting the majority of the complaints. And so it's really been difficult to find in 2021 the most serious complaints and to understand what is really working versus not working. So I would love to hear any feedback of how people feel like the riders of scooters are behaving versus past years, if they're learning with these new rules and the Lock 2 requirements, or if you are seeing some of the same issues and people don't feel like they're learning. I think anecdotally we're hearing most of them are positive that people are learning, but it's just one of those things that we just have to keep educating and staying on people. And then, like I said, we'd hired an artist to really explain the rules, and particularly, where is it appropriate to park a bike or a scooter near a transit facility? So on a light rail station, really the only place is at a designated parking area. Similarly, at a bus stop in the neighborhood, and then also looking at for keeping that pedestrian clear zone intersection area, showing this kind of the peach area is where you should never ride or park a scooter. Hoping that explains a little bit better for the rider of this is why you don't park in the wrong spot, because it obstructs the walkway for people that are trying to get through and can cause serious safety issues. So hopefully the visuals will really help people understand how to behave better. And like I mentioned, these were just some of the questions that I had of, how would you like to provide feedback? The RFP will be in the fall. So how would you like to provide feedback to me? We have a live feedback form, which I know has been shared out on Twitter and a couple other vehicles. So if people want to, obviously, please fill out the survey, but also if you have any other feedback or ideas you want to share with me about specific things that should be included in the RFP for bikes or scooter share. And then any other feedback that you have on this mobility work is really helpful.
Great, Danielle. We operate on resolutions with a lot of our work and sending back to relevant agencies. And I would think we could compose one to inform you of our collective opinion on the on what belongs in what we'd like to see in the RFP as regards bikes and scooters.
Okay, yeah.
That works for you. So we'll go right to questions then. Thank you for that. Thank you for that presentation. I see Austin's hand up. Austin.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for that presentation. It was very interesting. I live near the university, so that's where my interests are. And I'm curious to know a couple things about that. Does this RFP or does this process have any special considerations for the university and the immediate neighborhoods around the university, since those are such hot spots for micromobility and also micromobility misuse, I will say myself. And then also too, I'm curious because when I first saw that map, I noticed that there were very little, or there was no, I'm sorry, I forgot the word. There were no hubs in Southeast Minneapolis near the East Bank of the university. There were a few by West Bank, but not on East Bank. I'm just curious, was there a reason why was that determined to be that way? Is this an inappropriate program for the university area? I'm curious to know your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah. So particularly for the RFP, the university is one of our kind of strategic partners in that, and is going to be helping to both create the RFP as well as score it, and a really crucial part to our license agreements as well. Normally the university has their own license agreement, so we're trying to make sure that we're kind of working together as seamlessly as possible, and potentially doing some kind of a MOU or something with them. So it is really important, and they're involved in the entire process. So that's really important. For mobility hubs, the reasoning was we started with a focus on our ACP 50 areas. So focusing on the equity lens first to figure out the most complicated situations in the city, knowing that it would probably be easier to implement the ones where we had more infrastructure built out already. And it's already getting a lot of attention for other projects. That's not to say that in the like actual capital program, there won't be. There are definitely going to be hubs within the university system, and we'll be partnering on that as well. And that will be a really important piece of that. And we've talked a lot about it with the University of Minnesota staff as well.
Terrific. Christopher Hoffer.
Yes, hi there. Thank you for the presentation. Coincidentally, I received a contact from a senior yesterday who had a question that I couldn't answer, but she knew I was on this committee. And the question was, she had seen, come across, a scooter sort of discarded in the right of way on the sidewalk. I think she said on Oak Grove, but it could have been 15th. Anyway. And she went to 311 to report it.
Mhm.
And she was under the impression that there had been a change in reporting scooters like abandoned on the right of way on 311, that there's no category anymore to report it. Was that accurate, or is there something going on there?
So I kind of briefly mentioned that there are a couple of individuals who have unfortunately been kind of inundating the 311 app. So the See Click Fix app has been pretty badly abused throughout the season. So we had some serious violations of the terms of service of the See Click Fix app, and we had to remove scooter reporting from the app. So the most important way to be able to report these things is calling 311, emailing 311, or filling out the bike and scooter form on the 311 website. Those have always been our preferred method of dealing with it, because the good thing about those three options is it automatically sends the company directly the information as we receive it, whereas the See Click Fix app can only be, the way that the limitations of the app, we can only get to them every 24 hours, which means you have a much longer turnaround time in terms of getting that information to the companies. Once the companies get the information, then they have 2 hours to respond, which they are. But unfortunately, because we were getting so many, we'll say, non-violation reports, that the important stuff was getting lost. So
Sure.
We're now really focused on, we want people to email. We're adding a list to, the scooter website has all this information on there, but I'm adding a specific list of things that people should include in emails, like the company involved, the vehicle ID, if you can see it, the location, a picture, if you can, within these emails. And that's the best way that we can get the information and then give it directly to these companies.
Have you made that, albeit in a little briefer fashion, that notice on the app that there are these other preferred methods? Because I think she was just generally confused. I mean, I think generally she walks with a cane, and I would just flip it into the street. I mean, it doesn't belong on the sidewalk; it belongs on the street, so it can lay in the street. But I don't think she could do that. But I would encourage you to put it on the app.
Unfortunately, we can't. So the See Click Fix is a third-party app that we contract with. The only thing that can be put into See Click Fix is the categories that are eligible for submittal. So there are actually very few things that do use See Click Fix to submit things because of the limitations of the app, and has caused issues for the city where the information doesn't quite work perfectly with our 311 systems the way that we would like it to. So there's not a place on the app to have any kind of instructions, but if you were to go to the city website, if you were to go to the 311 website, it tells you exactly all the ways that you can contact 311. And again, the best way is just to call 311.
Going
Sounds
back to
good.
if you look at the math of the, assuming people weren't abusing See Click Fix in previous years, or if you do any of the math of the number of reports versus number of rides, it is zeros well into the 10,000th place, to the right of the decimal point. So it's I think it's because you can, most people just who are able to can see a scooter in the way and move it aside, set it aside, whatever. So that's good stuff. It's just tons of rides, very little complaints. Julia Curran.
Hi. Hi, I've got a couple of questions. And I think the first two are mainly comments. The second two are more questions. So firstly, I appreciate what's going on, but the attention to scooters and bikes blocking the side, so given how chronic drivers are getting worse, as far as I can tell, especially last year. And I would love, I know it isn't you, but whoever the parallel, your
I am having a hard time hearing Julia. Is anyone?
Likewise.
Yeah, Julia, we
I
lost
can't
you.
hear. I can't hear her.
really focus on.
Oh, no. Yeah, you're gone.
Julia, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
We
Oh,
can't
we
hear you
can
well.
hear you.
Go back in.
I'll call in. With this much video, my internet can't handle it. So I will call in and ask the questions. But go on to whoever might be next, please.
Okay. The what's been demonstrated by the car share, bike share, scooter share, particularly with the advent of like an expanded car share, will be really exciting because those are modes that are proving to take cars off the street. They're really taking vehicle miles down as opposed to things like Uber and Lyft, which comparatively just put more cars around the street all the time. There's a lot to be. Is there anything? What do we know about the coming expanded hour car expansion, the electric cars, et cetera? Is that rolling out similarly to something like Car2Go was before, or what do we know? Do we know many details about that? What and when to expect it?
I do not oversee that program, but
Okay.
the best of my understanding is that it will be rolled out in the next year. I think partially there's been delays because of supply chain logistics issues internationally of trying to get some of the charging station infrastructure to Minnesota has been a challenge. But they're moving forward in terms of communication plans and outreach, and branding is done, all that kind of stuff. So it should be rolling out.
All right, excited about that. Christian Hulsman is in the gallery today. Good to see you, Christian, and your hand up. What's going on?
Good to see you too. I had a couple questions regarding the lock to. By the way, I should say I've noticed a considerable difference in the amount of obstructions in the sidewalk. It's been night and day in a lot of areas where I've seen previously toppled scooters, toppled bikes, and the like. So I think it's definitely an effective move on the part of the program. The other part that I was going to mention is how scooters in the right of way and bikes in the right of way sometimes can create challenges for people of compromised mobility, people who are elderly, even children who are allowed to ride bikes on the sidewalk up to a certain age. However, I do notice too, private vehicles parked on sidewalks, like construction vehicles, contractors, and the like. How do those different violations get handled, either similarly or differently? Does it go through the same city division or department, or is it separate?
So it's a little tricky because every vehicle has a different state statute kind of definition and rules of riding and parking. Any kind of a moving violation, bikes, scooters, cars, it goes through police enforcement. So it's a moving violation by the state. Parking is a different story. So traffic control oversees car parking and those kinds of issues, blocking sidewalks, blocking bike lanes, that kind of thing. For scooters, we have a little bit additional help where, because we have a license agreement with these two companies, if we receive a complaint about a parking issue, we then send that directly to the vendor. They deploy someone who then moves it and fix it. We have it's the one thing, I guess, that we have some control over it. I wish that sometimes you wish you had control over, you could do that with cars. You could have some accountability. Yeah. for really bad behavior, we have more tools to do that. We also have internal tools within staff, and I'm working on getting this kind of enforcement ability expanded to our partners, so the University of Minnesota, Metro Transit, and the Park Board as well, that when we as an employee witness something, I can submit a direct fine. And our intention was to eventually hire someone to do full-time enforcement on scooters. Unfortunately, we lost that position within budget cuts last year. But the hope is that, we are able to have somebody out on the street like traffic control to deal with particularly of micromobility parking issues. Unfortunately, what we're limited to now is people submitting to 311, and then as we see it as employees. So I've, given out the information to every single project manager on a construction site. If they're seeing issues, they can report it to me or through the app, and it goes directly to the companies.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thanks, Christian. Julia, back on the phone?
I am. I couldn't tell how much of what Christian was asking was maybe overlapping with the first thing I was trying to ask about, which was really, there's so few problems with scooters compared to private vehicles, and so little enforcement, if any, so little done to make sure that anything is improving rather than getting worse in terms of drivers blocking bike lanes, sidewalks, and crosswalks. And I really enjoyed seeing the educational component, but I just keep picturing it being shared with drivers who are the actual problems in our city. So that was comment one. Comment two is right now our bike share program does not have bikes that are small enough for many people, particularly women of color. And the racial and gender implications of that are pretty clear, have been. The city and Nice Ride have both been silent on that for the entirety of the program. And I love the concept of Nice Ride. I have not been able, because I'm a smaller person, have not been able to really use it myself, especially with the removal of the blue bikes. So I would love to see the city really make sure that this is a program that's accessible physically to, I'd love to see it expanded to adaptive bicycles as well, but at the very least to make it work for women of color who tend to be shorter on average, rather than centering white male bodies. I also, the hubs and ambassadors aspects are great. I'm a little concerned about the tech focus, and especially where it might be at the expense of our most basic pedestrian infrastructure, like benches, bathrooms, and water fountains, and then shelter from rain or sun, or warmth and lack of, direct sunlight on some days. And especially this gets into sort of what my real question would be, is that there's a tension between prioritizing mode share shift versus supporting people who are car free and transit dependent already. That seems like it might kind of come up in the placement of where different things are and in what it takes to try to make spaces work for people, whether if it's really about shifting mode share. I don't drive, I have a permit but no license. I'm a trapped audience. You can do whatever and I'm gonna live with it. And that's, that's a majority of people who seem to be being prioritized within the ACP outreach. And I really like that outreach, but I'm wondering about making it so to sort of support needs like cargo bikes, carts, how to move things when you don't have a car, how do you move things quickly, like some of the amenities that I'm hearing are just ones I would never consider using because I have never had a car. It's not trying to sway me into that. And I'm wondering about how to prioritize, like making it sexy or that tech focus versus really meeting people's needs when we don't have cars and really making sure that we're meeting the most basic pedestrian needs, like benches, bathrooms, and water at not just the hubs, but regularly enough that you can walk to the grocery store when you're 80. So I don't know if there's anything you can talk about within that last question.
Yeah. Okay, let me answer your last question first, and I'll go back to the size one. So when we talk about the amenities at mobility hubs, like bare minimum, it is seating, lighting, heat, whatever those basic things are going to be central to that no matter what. They're actually going to be pretty low tech. And when I talk about bike parking too, what we're trying to figure out is, like you mentioned, bike parking and that can accommodate cargo bikes that can accommodate adaptive bikes. Not necessarily, only for charging situations or only for shared mobility vehicles. It needs to accommodate all of these different modes. And, I think maybe the most tech focused thing that we've got that we're testing and looking at right now is potentially the locker systems. But the hope is that within that, it can help people who are already transit dependent to make it easier for them to access things that they crucially need, like food delivery, prescription delivery, library access, access to other human services, kind of those crucial pieces, which Hennepin County uses their locker systems to be able to give out like EBT card pickups and things like that. So focused on human services is the really crucial part of that. Hopefully that
sounds great, and that really helps.
Okay.
All right, we have to move on. We're right up at 6 o'clock, and it's been a great talk. A lot of our thoughts we'll continue. We'll build a resolution. I think we'll do our best to speak to your RFP and what PAC would like to what our idea is, what we'd like to see. Thank you, Danielle, a lot. It was a good presentation.
Thank you.
Last item on our agenda is a resolution brought forth or subsequent to some discussion as part of a previous resolution speaking to the county speed limits. And is there anybody there who can bring it up? Chris?
Yeah, one sec.
Yeah, thanks. Resolution came from discussion about saying about what we could do to influence or call on the Hennepin County to seek and obtain the authority to set speed limits where the city of Minneapolis has moved in the last couple of years to set to 2025. So, and would like to bring this to our full PAC meeting in August. And if I may, I'll read the resolution on Hennepin County Speed Limit Authority, where we say PAC calls on Hennepin County to seek and secure general authority to design and post at the citywide speed limit of not more than 25 miles per hour. PAC believes the county should have full control over speed limits on its streets. They should not be prevented by state preemption from conforming to Minneapolis speed limits set for safety and for giving people in motor vehicles a traveling speed suited to enjoying our city rather than racing through it. That's the whole resolution. It's for review at this point. Like what I guess we don't need to vote on it here, I don't think, in the subcommittee, but we just wanted to show it here to be ready for to have people on people's minds for editing. Any ideas, any editing additions at our full PAC meeting? Any certainly entertain anyone's comments right now. Probably have my own edit, but I'll save it for
the only.
Yeah, go ahead, Julia.
The only edit, I'm not quite sure how to say it, but it's kind of like ideally the city would be able to control speed limits, including on county roads. So I just would like to have that second paragraph, first sentence, maybe be a little more contained to so long as the county is setting speed limits, or, so long as.
Sure.
I don't want to make it sound like we don't. Yeah, thank you.
We want to embed some thoughts on that, whether that we don't think Hennepin County should be, we don't think anybody other than the city of Minneapolis should be setting speed limits on any streets in the city of Minneapolis. So embed that somewhere. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Basically, although if the county suddenly got, was willing to drop them lower than the city's willing to, the lowest speeds should prevail.
All right, see
And we
the
know
bike
that's the
links,
city.
see the bike trails.
Mhm.
All right, so, yeah, all right, anybody else? So yes, we could say, yeah, so the park board wide speed limit of not more than 10 miles an hour on its bike paths. All right, that's a good thought. Anybody, anything else? Because if not, we'll.
Yes, I
go
just very briefly.
There you are. Yeah.
I'm basically the last clause of the last sentence, everything after safety. I'm not a big fan of it. I think racing through it is sounds too I don't know, sort of casual or something. I think it's primarily for safety, and next for you could talk about the effect of just going slower for climate benefit and that kind of thing. But for enjoying the city, I would focus more on the safety, because I think that's what drove the city to put it at 20 or 25. So that's my 2
Sure,
cents.
yeah, and yeah, that's definitely true, and it definitely says that. Cities around us, especially smaller ones, have spoken up to say exactly that. It's not our job, and I know, I'm sure it can be put better, differently, but it's not our job, City of Richfield, to say it's not our job to get people through our city as fast as possible. That's not what our roads are for. That's not what roads are for. That's not what to serve drivers getting them through our city as fast as possible. So I appreciate that it's going to be, we can put it another way. But I really would like to, if appropriate, and if the PAC agrees, and start to include that kind of thinking. It isn't just that it's not that the speed limits are not punitive.
Mm-hmm.
Speed limits benefit every user.
Yeah, I agree. I think I agree with you, Peter. And I'll think a little bit about some wordsmithing. I know that we've already after 6, so I'll. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, I would appreciate your writing input on that for sure. And anyone's. Okay, that's it. We will adjourn pending anybody's announcement.
Yeah, just want to make sure. I know that Christian Hilsman is in this meeting, and I believe is leaving the city, and was a valuable and many year PAC member. So I think it would be. I don't know if you have anything to share with us as you're heading out, Christian, or now you must have said something, so your face popped back up. But I just want to thank you for everything that you've done for the PAC, and everything that I've learned about alleys in particular from you. And I want to just give you that space, or others, for since we won't run into you around town, it sounds like.
Right. Yeah, I guess a few months ago I did kind of bid folks farewell for my last official PAC meeting as a member, but I just wanted to thank all of you. Most of you I remember from my 5 years, or very close to it, on the PAC board. So I wanted to thank you personally for the pleasure of working with you on all these issues to improve walkability, bikeability, rollability in the city of Minneapolis. It was an opportunity that I couldn't have expected, and I'm going back to a city that certainly needs a lot better resources to allow folks like ourselves to get and maintain involvement to improve those conditions for all users. Just wanted to call out a couple of things. I really enjoyed working on the 2040 plan, on the tab, and continuing to push on various things like lowering speed limits and rethinking how freeway approaches interact the downtown area and very walkable city streets otherwise. And surely, yes, trying to rethink how alley crossings T intersections and all those other things come into play too for people walking. So thanks again, and I'll be back to visit in a few months.
All
All
right.
right. Best of luck.
Best of luck.
Yeah, safe travels, Kristen.
Oh,
Yep.
I guess one more
Farewell.
thing too. I will be going to grad school at the University of Cincinnati to get my master's in community planning, and I'll also be getting a certificate in public art and placemaking. So just
All right.
Yeah.
chime in if we're friends on social media. I'd love to hear what you guys are working on too.
Please do. Go
Take care.
Bearcats.
Awesome.
All right, one and all.
All
That
right.
looks like that's it. 6:07. Thanks, y'all.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone.
care.
Nice to see you.